cram just about all we can into the center of our mandalas. So the next 2 weeks we're going to be working on the corners, and this is where our circle turns into a square. Welcome to Mandala Unplugged Part 6. I'm Myhre, and I'm so happy you've joined me here today. As always, at the end of this video, I have included a slideshow of your fellow mandala makers, so it is definitely worth sticking around to see that. The colors and textures that are happening are incredible. You know, before we get started, I just want to say how impressed I am with our group. Designing and creating as you go without a pattern or a specific materials list is definitely a bit different for most people. It takes faith and trust above everything else, and as much as I appreciate your faith in me to get you through this project, what is so great is to see the trust you all have in yourselves to choose materials and textures that are right for your piece. You know, and I hope that you're enjoying creating this way. You know, it's such a confidence booster going forward, knowing that you don't need a materials list set in stone or a specific pattern to follow. You know, you can keep yourself open to whatever thoughts and ideas come your way as you're creating. I wrote my book, Quilt is Inspired, for anyone who is craving a more personal way to make a quilt or an art piece. And I am going to continue that series for everyone who's enjoying the process. But for now, let's go ahead and work on Mandala Unplugged. Okay, so before we do anything else on this piece, we need to remeasure and remark, because when you're hand stitching or machine stitching or doing any sort of fiber work on a piece, as you probably know, we're going to experience some shrinkage. And that is the nature of the beast. That's completely normal. But what we want to do before we go to the corners is make sure that we re-establish those lines. And you can see, and probably on yours, I've still got my faint lines here, but what we're going to do is remark them. Now before, when we did this, we marked these at 8 inches from our center line so that we would have a 16-inch piece. I have lost 1/4 of an inch on either side of this line. So now my finished piece will be 15.5. So if I measure my faint line on this side to here, it's 15.5. So what that means is, what I need to do is, when I want to remark, we're not doing the 8 inch anymore. We're doing 7 3/4. So I'm going to put my original ruler not on the 2, but on the 1 3/4 mark, and make sure that down below, same thing, so that your ruler lies straight. So there. You can't see that on camera, but at the bottom of this ruler, I've made sure that I'm at 1 3/4. And you may notice that you're going to have some extra fabric, kind of, especially in the corners, but we're going to do some stitching in the corners, so that will kind of bunch everything up and make that straight again. So don't worry so much about that. I've got some waving too. That, again, that's the nature of the beast. You will have that. And so now with my ruler at 1 3/4, I'm going to put my 6-inch ruler alongside of that, and then I'm going to mark my hairline from that corner all the way down to the next corner, and do that on all 4 sides. And again, this is going to be a little wavy on this side. Don't worry about that. What we really want to do is make sure that our mandala is perfectly centered so that the outside makes sense. You know, we're going to be working from the outer points up here. We're going to be placing our corner applique, and we're going to start at that corner, so we want to make sure. So now your piece may measure 15.5, so that's 7 3/4 on this side, 7 3/4 on this side. And that is perfectly okay. You may have done so much stitching, yours might measure 15, and that's fine. All you really want to do is remark these lines and make sure that your mandala is centered. So I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera. You should do that too before we continue. And then we're going to work the rest of the background stitching. So then grab out your original thread that you used for the stitching. So now we need to establish the line that we're going to stitch to place our applique. And what we're going to do is we're going to work from the top of this third piece of Oya or embroidery or whatever you did, just whatever the top peak here, and we need to draw a line from here to here. And if you remember how we did that with a file folder down below a couple weeks ago, we're going to do the same thing. This time I have Quilter's Template Plastic, and working away from the tips, because of course I have a Sharpie here, so I want to make sure that I'm not marking on my piece. I made a line at a 90-degree angle from this stitch line. So these lines here represent my newly marked lines, and this represents the line that's coming down to here. So it's a little hard to see through that for you on camera, but I can see it fine. And if you don't have Quilter's Template Plastic, of course, you could just use another file folder and then cut your line and you know, draw your line and then cut it and then make a cardboard template out of it. But in this case, I'm going to go ahead and just show you something a little different. So all I'm going to do is just sort of make this arc up to there. And that's all you really have to do. And if your line is a little wavy, like you can see there's a bit of a it doesn't matter because you're going to cut on that anyway, and you wouldn't cut that wave in. You're going to cut an actual arc. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this out, and then this is the template that I'm going to use with my Myhre marker to make those lines. And then before I do that, I'm just going to go ahead and make, let's go ahead and make this side one too. So just make a T on whatever it is that you're using. Line it up with your marked line and that line coming down. You can just finish that out. Well, so from the tippy top of here, we're going to just make a little arc. So same thing. Just draw it coming down. And this part doesn't really matter, so just, you know, cut across there. Just to make sure that the Sharpie doesn't transfer to my fabric, I'm just going to cut inside all of the lines so you won't see any pink Sharpie at all. So once you have your templates cut out, whether it's plastic or cardboard, all you're going to do now is mark the stitching line coming up. So don't be alarmed if your template isn't exactly this, you know, matching up everything on every side. It's just impossible to be because we're hand stitching this and we've eyed a lot of this up. Within 1/4 of an inch, you're completely fine. So what you do want to do, make sure though, is that this is whether it's on the line or just slightly off a little bit, just make sure this is straight. You know, in other words, you don't want to go from here to here and that this, see how that's crooked? Just make sure that that is straight, and then you're good to go. So I want to kind of be a little closer over here, so I'm going to move the whole template there. That's good enough. And then when you mark, just go slow and mindful, because it's real easy to run off of your template here. And just press down on your template. And that is awesome. And then the little guy, same thing. You want to just make sure that that's running along your stitch line already, and that the point is up here. And you know, in my mind, I was thinking, oh, maybe these will meet right here at the top bead. But it looks like maybe the way that I cut mine, I'm going to have 1/4 of an inch of a space, which is fine. But I'm going to be consistent all the way around, so that whenever I'm hitting this, these two lines aren't going to meet. There's going to be a little bit of space, which will look great. I don't have strong feelings about it either way. What I do have strong feelings about is that it looks the same, you know, close to the same all the way around. So again, then just mark your piece up to your outer line there. And then flip your template over, and let's see what we're going to land on over here. Yeah, so looks like I'm lining that up. That's fine. And I'm going to be a little bit farther on this side too, where the other line will go here, so there'll be that little space in there, and that's good. I might move that over just a little bit so that my line comes a little closer, you know, because we've got that center bead, and that will be in between the spaces. So that's good. And lift, see what's happening, lift your Myhre marker up, because your fabric, you know, I have to make sure that I remember, I don't want to stitch on that little that line right there, and that'll come out in pressing, so it's not a big deal. You just want to make sure you know where you're stitching. And then to go back and do this, let's see where we land. Okay, so we've got this up into the corner, and this is lined up with our line. Might push it over just a tad. And that space right there, pretty similar to this space right there, so I'm good with that. And then again, just take your hero marker or your stylus or whatever it is, your butter knife, and just lift it up. Remember, because your line can get a little funky if you just make one big pass, and all the way up to the corner, so that these will become your stitching lines. So go ahead and do that all the way around. You're going to have obviously 4 points and 4 little arcs here. Take your background thread and stitch it, reminding yourself 1/8 inch between your stitches. You're trying to go for 4 stitches to the inch, and then come on back and we're going to work our corner applique. So once you have all of your stitching done, you're going to have something that looks like this. So go ahead and measure, your points, point to point, and make sure that you are very close to what your overall finished measurement, and mine, as I mentioned, is 15.5. So I was within 1/4 of an inch of 15.5 all the way around. Make sure that the side doesn't go too far. Try to touch that line that you drew before. To work the corner applique, you're going to need these template pieces here. So this is G for fabric G, and then these are for fabric C. You're also going to need fabric E, and what that is the little center that's going to go behind. We're going to do something, it's not exactly reverse applique, but it looks like reverse applique, where we're going to fold the end of this under and then pop a piece of fabric underneath it, so it kind of looks like we have cut this hole to show the fabric underneath, but really we're just kind of doing a little cheaty reverse applique method, and I'll show you that in a bit. This is the center of G, so if you can keep that in one piece, just fold your template, cut a slit in it, and then cut around it. That can serve as your template for E, so that you know the size of what's going to go underneath here. G is the only one that you need to leave a seam allowance for, as well as E, just because you'll need that extra to glue it underneath here. The C pieces, we're actually going to do raw edge applique, so make sure you mark the left and the right template as they're shown on that piece of paper, and then also make sure that you're marking your fusibles. So once you cut your templates out, what you're going to do is take your fusible product, fusible side up. I generally do that so I don't have to think about reversing, although in this case it wouldn't matter because we're dealing with symmetry, but it's just a good habit to get into. And I'm just using a pencil here. And then so we're going to do 4 of these. It's going to go a little faster because we've just got the 4 corners, where before we've been doing 8 of everything, and now we're going to be doing 4 of everything, so that's kind of nice. And then same with here, C, you're going to trace. Then mark your templates for left and right, and then when you're done tracing each of these templates, you're going to flip it over and mark L and R, because these look really similar. It's hard to tell them apart when you're working with them, but boy, it's easy to tell them apart if you put them in the wrong order, upside down. So okay, so just flip your fusible over, that's the left one, mark an R. So you will be pressing, cut these out right on the line and press them to the wrong side of your assigned fabric. So this is fabric G, and these are both the same. If you want to, of course, you can do 2 different fabrics for these. It's all good. It's whatever you want to do. So once you have those cut out, you press them onto the wrong side of your fabric, and this way you know which one's R and which one's L. And because these are raw edge applique, the side pieces and the tips, you can cut the fabric right out on the line. Now G is a little different because we are going to be glue turning this under. So what you're going to want to do is when you press your G fusible to the wrong side of your fabric, make sure you're leaving that 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then in the center just make a slit right there. And then we're going to cut this and fold it under with glue. So just for now, prepare all of your fusibles and get them cut out and on the wrong side, and then we'll come back and we'll do a little refresher on glue turning this piece right here. One thing that I wanted to mention is if you are using a fabric that has a direction, like in this case where it's plaid, it looks best if you can, you know, it's not so much fussy cut, although if you have motifs, definitely fussy cut. These would be really cool. But in any, even if you have a directional fabric with just lines, make sure that you're always placing your template in the same direction, you know, not like one here, one here, one here. Otherwise, it's, you know, visually that could get noticed. So what I did was I just took this fusible and on the wrong side, I lined this up, pressed this to the wrong side, left my 1/2 inch, because of course we're turning here, and then just in the same sort of direction. So I just wanted to mention that. I forgot to say that last time. So as far as glue turning this, let's deal with the middle first. What we've done is we've cut a line in here, and you can cut it all the way, almost all the way within like 1 thread of where the fusible stops. And you don't have to cut out the shape here because we're going to be cutting this so much in so many places. So it's, you know, every 1/4 inch we're going to cut this guy so it has lots of room to just spread out and make a nice smooth concave curve. And then you just take your glue and get it right on the edge. Let's just do one side at a time. And then starting in the center, really close to that fusible web, remember. And this is actually easier than you might think. It's like it wants to come up on that curve. You can see the other pieces just kind of flip up, like they want to stay there. Then just take your finger and just smooth it all around. And while this glue is still wet in some places, we can just pop another dab maybe on top of those folds. Take that E piece and then you've got what looks like reverse applique. And then just to do the outside, make sure that your glue is right on the edge. And then we are on that convex curve, so we're going to start in the middle. And this curve is so gentle that you really could even use your hand to smooth the curve as long as you're staying real close to that edge when you smooth it over. Got a little wave there. And gentle curves, it's just so much easier. These tools really come in handy when you have some crazy curves and crazy shapes. And then to deal with those little flags, remember we just fold them under, give it a good pinch, fold this under, give it a good pinch, And then there you've got your applique shape. And any sort of weird bump you can run with your fingernail. To finish out this applique, what we have to do is stitch along this curve here. So we talked about matching your thread whenever you're doing applique stitch to the applique, not the background. Although in this case, my stuff is kind of blending, so I'm just using this sort of aqua thread. But if you have something dramatically different here, match your thread to this applique piece. So I'm coming out of one of the corners here, and this is just the same thing we've been doing. Get the light. Go down directly in front of where your thread is coming out on the background piece. So where my thread is coming out here, I'm not going up here, or I'm not starting behind. I'm going directly across into the background, and then coming up 1/8 of an inch away from where my thread is coming out. And then just stitch that down, because the glue will only hold so long. So you've got to stitch that down in place. Go ahead and exit your needle right out the point of the top of the applique. And we're going to pop some rickrack around it, and we're going for this look here. So this rickrack is 1/4 of an inch rickrack. This is a sparkly one, so it's a little trickier to work with just because of the metallic in there. Sort of has a mind of its own. But what we're going to do is just sort of baste this on before we stitch the applique down to our background. So starting at the corner, and you know, in this case you don't really have to worry about going 1/8 of an inch or into 1/16 of an inch, because we are going to sew this basically twice. You know, once to get it on, and then once again to stitch it onto the background. So all you're going to do is go, you know, maybe into the bump. Tricky to get this started. You could pin it in place. If I wasn't lazy, I would do that, but I'm being lazy right now. And then back out the bump and into the side. You can see that. Okay, I wanted to zoom in a little closer so you could see this. So I know it's tricky. So going into the bump, I'm trying to make the rickrack, the bottom lumps of the rickrack, sort of line up with the edge of the piece. So I'm going to go in, and of course this is metallic, so I've got to find the right hole. There we go. In, and then back up. See that the next little lump, and then out the edge of my applique right there. You can see that. Just pull really slowly, because this thread is going to want to wrap around this rickrack when you're up here at the beginning. So it's in the bump, and then just come out the next bump and right out the edge of your applique. And you know, here's a hint, before you even pull this through, just move that yarn and put it in your hand, or it's going to keep getting caught on that and drive you crazy. Really slowly pull it. Can you imagine trying to do this and stitch it onto the background piece at the same time? It would take a lot longer and make us a lot grayer. Okay, so all the way down to this corner. There's a couple of things you can do. Of course, fold that little flap out of the way. You can just sort of swing it all the way around, you know, bend it up, and then just keep going. I find it kind of easier to just fold it back on itself like this. And that way you're not dealing with a curve that's trying to fit around a very steep point. And just pinch everything down. Then you can just begin sewing it up the other side. Now through the fold, you may want to just come out just through that rather than trying to come up at the same time. And then maybe come up through a piece of rickrack, the next bump, and through your applique. And then just resume stitching in the bump, out the next bump, and through the applique. And you've noticed I didn't pre-cut this rickrack because inevitably you're either going to be 1/4 of an inch too long and then you wasted some and you run out the end, or it's worse yet, it's going to be too short at the end, and that drives me crazy. So it's best to just have a long strand that you're working with, and then at the end clip it right where you want it, and I will show you that. So I'm going to work my way back up to the top just through these bumps here, making sure to line the bottom of the rickrack up with the edge of the applique as best you can. Pull really slowly. Take your time and try to just be patient through it. Okay, so when you reach the end of it, basically all you're going to do is, rather than trying to come down and back up through all of this stuff, because of course we're going to go through our original piece, just work a couple stitches back and forth. So again, then come up, oops. Come up through the rickrack and the tip of the applique. And then we're going to include that beginning so it kind of looks like one piece. And that's good enough for now because of course we're going to stitch this onto the piece. So now you can just clip this, and then tie this off in the back, and then when we go to sew the piece on, that rickrack will be nice and stable and we can just work around it. Okay, so make 4 of those, and then we're going to go ahead and stitch these pieces onto the background. Okay, so to start the corner, laying out all this applique, we're going to take this tip, and remember this is a raw edge applique, so we have not folded this under. Some of you who have done raw edge applique might be wondering, why didn't I use steam a seam or a double-sided fusible, which of course you could do. And what that is that's, if you don't know what that is a double-sided fusible where you would do just what we did with the one-sided fusible product, but then this would be a sticky, positionable product on the back that it would just stick down while you sew. And I do use that a lot. But in this case, I had already had the one-sided out and ready to go. So it was really just a matter of logistics. Like, I don't really need to pull out another product because this one works just as well. All we're going to do, rather than iron it and stick it to the back, is just pin it in place. So what you're looking for is just to put the point of the tip inside the point of where you stitched. And then we're going to take embroidery floss, or excuse me, we're going to take embroidery thread G, which is an 8, kind of a smaller thread, and just work a blanket stitch around this piece, and I'll show you how to do that. So starting maybe at the point, just so we can get this stitched in and we can take the pin out as soon as possible, we're going to exit the needle out at the point, not through the applique, but just at the point. And then a blanket stitch, we're going to work 1/8 inch apart and maybe 1/8 inch into the applique. And this is really great because it's decorative and functional. So you just insert the needle 1/8 of an inch from the edge and 1/8 of an inch from the point, and exit the needle right out the side where the applique is lying. And then just like a lazy daisy stitch, make sure that your thread is lying underneath, and then slowly pull the thread, and then you've got that nice little stitch there that's going to hold this in. Again, right down 1/8 of an inch away, and I'm working not through the back but just through the batting in the front of the piece, making sure that the thread is under the needle. All right, all the way down to the tip, and then I'll show you what to do with that. So down at the corner, usually what I do is I won't pierce the fabric here, or it's just going to fray. So I'll kind of go under, just underneath, and then here you're going to want to pull really slowly to make sure that this stitch covers that point. Then what I do is I'll take a little bite of fabric on the other side of this line and come up the other side. And then that way, that lets me change direction without pulling anything out of place. And then come up the other side. And, you know, just depending on how tiny and skinny this is, I may just use that same line here. Just to really lock that in place. And you can kind of pinch that close so it comes more to a point, but really we're going to cover that with that big applique we were just working on. So to continue along this circle, we're still at, you know, 1/8 of an inch away, and don't be tempted to see how this line is sort of angling up this way. Really what you're wanting to do is keep it horizontal. So see where my needle, at the edge of this applique here, my needle is forming a T, and that's the direction that you want. Otherwise it starts to look kind of odd. You know, you want your lines to be perpendicular to the line of your applique piece. So I'm not angling it this way or this way, it's straight. And it may be worth just giving a little tug so that that line lays flat. So what you're trying to do is have the entire outline of this raw edge applique be covered by your line of the blanket stitch, with each stitch actually on the piece. So I want to show you what happens if you run out of thread and how to start this blanket stitch in the middle. So I clearly do not have enough thread to keep going, so I'm just going to push this back down into the back, finish that out. And then you just have to think about, you know, what if you hadn't run out? Where would your yarn be coming out of? And it would be coming out right there. On the left side, as you're looking at this piece, in that little corner there. And then you can just continue on. Back up to the top, making sure that you're, again, putting your needle perpendicular to that line, so that the blanket stitches are lying straight, and then work yourself right back up to the top. And as you pull this last one, just make sure you're over that point. And then if it's possible, sometimes what I'll do is I'll just take the needle and I'll push down on the point of the applique, and then knot it on the back. So if you look at the applique, there's a place, you know, one side is a little bit heavier than the other side. So it's up to you how you want to angle that. Just make sure you're being consistent. I like it where the wider part is up through here. So what you're just going to do is lay this right on top of these points. Make sure your point is on the line, and you've got about 1/2 an inch of space right here. And then pin this in place. Okay, and then here's what this looks like, just to stitch it down. So I've come up through the back, I'm going down in the applique, and I'm just going pretty deep, not through the back really, just through the batting and the backing, and then coming up where the bottom of the rickrack meets the applique. So just down, catching a bit of the rickrack, definitely catching the back and the batting. And I wouldn't worry about even working every 1/8 of an inch here because this is already stitched. Okay, so down in then to the rickrack, the bottom, through the backing, through the back fabric and the batting, but not the back. And then again, just come up to the side of your applique. And if you match your thread to your applique, then you shouldn't see this at all. Very slowly pulling it through because it's going to want to knot. Okay, and I'll just do one more. Up through the edge. There's something about that rickrack that wants to make this thread kind of shreddy. It's just because I've used a metal one, I'm sure. So just really carefully, you know, pull it through and tighten it down, leaving these little rickrack guys kind of floating up so there's texture. Okay, all the way around. So once your G unit is in place and stitched down, then you're going to take your left, I'm calling them little legs, and place it over your stitch line so that the swoopy part just sort of is at the top. And same here, and your right one will go on your stitching on this side. Pin those in place and then blanket stitch just like you did up here. You can use the same thread G, or you could use one of the flosses, 2 strands of one of the flosses E or F, whichever it is that you decide. So stitch those down and then make this arrangement on all 3 of the corners. And then next week we're going to come back and work the embroidery and all of the details in each corner, and then our corners will be done. Okay, once you finish this week's part, this is what your mandala will look like. So now it's sort of looking like a quilt block. You know, we've gone from circular mandala or kaleidoscope into potential quilt blocks, which is really kind of cool if you're a quilter. So I want to thank you again so much for joining me for part 6 of Mandala Unplugged. I can't wait for next week so we can get some more details in this corner and really finish them out. And I leave you with this beautiful show of mandalas from your fellow stitchers. Have a wonderful day.